All right. Good afternoon. The Secretary General this morning spoke at the high-level pledging conference of the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, otherwise known as the CERF, which he called the most effective investment that can be made in humanitarian action. He noted that the pace of crises has been relentless in 2019, with CERF having supported people in 44 countries this year, from Yemen to Afghanistan to Colombia. The Secretary General said that CERF is the only global emergency fund that is fast, predictable, and flexible enough to reach tens of millions of people each year. It also provides funding without the bureaucracy that can slow down our work, so the money is available within days, sometimes hours, of disaster striking. He also said the fund has helped to sustain relief operations in long-running crises to avoid gaps in critical services for the most vulnerable people when funding levels are low. The Secretary General said he was grateful for the generosity of 127 member states and observers, as well as other donors who have contributed to the CERF. In addition, 52 member states have received CERF funding, have also contributed to the fund, making it truly a fund for all, by all. The General Assembly has set a $1 billion yearly funding target for the CERF, and the fund provided a record $200 million into 21 crises last year. His remarks have been shared with you. Related to the CERF, the Mark Lowcock, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, has set aside some $2.6 million from the Emergency Fund to support the response to the measles outbreak in Samoa and other countries in the Pacific. The funds will be used for emergency vaccination, obstetrics, and neonatal care for mothers and newborns infected with measles, mental health and psychosocial support, as well as water, sanitation, and hygiene assistance for about 1.25 million people. More information online. The Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammad is in Amman today, where she is meeting with senior government authorities, the UN country team, regional representatives, and other entities part of the UN system. On Saturday, she was in Qatar, where she spoke at the Doha International Conference on Disability and Development. She said that 80% of the estimated 1 billion persons with disabilities worldwide live in developing countries and are among the more marginalized in any crisis-affected community, with the disaster mortality rate more than double that of the general population. She noted that this past June, the Secretary General launched the first ever UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, a framework for action by the UN system. The strategies are a commitment to persons with disabilities, she said, establishing the foundation for the systemic and sustainable change we need. She also spoke on Saturday with leading women of Qatar on women's empowerment and gender equality. She said that gender equality is the challenge of our lifetime and of this generation. Her remarks are online. And after her meetings in Amman, Deputy Secretary General will fly to Aswan in Egypt to attend the Aswan Forum on Sustainable Peace and Development. She will also meet with participating senior government officials. On Thursday, she will be in London with senior officials and other stakeholders around the decade of action to deliver the sustainable goals by 2030. She will be back in New York on Sunday. And turning to Baghdad, the special representative of the Secretary General for Iraq, Janine Hennis-Plasschaert, met yesterday with Iraqi President Barham Salih and discussed the current political and security developments in the country. Over the weekend, she said she condemned in the strongest terms the shooting of unarmed protesters in central Baghdad that took place on Friday night, which left a high number of deaths and injuries among citizens. She said the deliberate killing of innocent unarmed protesters by armed individuals is nothing less than an atrocity against the people of Iraq, and that the perpetrators must be identified and brought to justice without delay. The special representative urged the Iraqi armed forces to spare no effort to protect peaceful protesters from violence by armed elements operating outside of state control. She calls on peaceful protesters to cooperate constructively to ensure peaceful protests can be duly protected. Turning to Syria, some 4 million people in need across northern Syria are supported by the UN cross-border humanitarian assistance mechanism, including 2.7 million people in the northwest who rely solely on those operations for life-saving assistance. Since 2014, the UN has sent nearly 30,000 trucks of humanitarian assistance across 4 border crossings named in the Security Council Resolution 2165. Nearly 2,000 trucks have passed through those crossings in October and November. More people are being reached than ever before. In November alone, the UN provided 1.1 million people with food through cross-border deliveries, double the amount that was in January of 2019. The operation from Turkey has grown by more than 40% since the time last year due to the increase in humanitarian needs. Life-saving assistance, such as medicine, is sent from Iraq into northeast Syria, providing assistance that cannot otherwise reach people in those areas. The cross-border operations in Syria is one of the most closely scrutinized aid delivery systems in the world today, and we continue to take every step possible to ensure that the operation meets the highest standards of accountability. And as you recall, we told you last week that following attacks in the Congo against civilians and Ebola responders, we have decided to send Lieutenant General Carlos Alberto dos Santos Cruz of Brazil to the country. He will be traveling to the DRC tomorrow. There, he will assess the ability of peacekeeping force to effectively deliver the mandate to protect civilians in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and to neutralize armed groups in North Kivu and Ituri province. He's expected to submit an internal report to the head of UN peacekeeping by early January. And Ursula Mueller, the Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, is arriving in Niger today, where she will be until the 14th of December to assess humanitarian situation on the ground and the needed response. Ms. Mueller is scheduled to meet with the President of Niger, the Prime Minister, and other senior government officials. She will also meet with NGOs and the UN country team. Ms. Mueller will travel to Difa, Maradi, and Tillaberi to meet impacted people and to assess emergency relief operations to address the needs of more than 218,000 refugees and 187,000 internally displaced people. An estimated 2.9 people in Niger will need humanitarian assistance in 2020. The UN and our humanitarian partners aims to assist 1.8 million people in the next year. That's an increase from 1.6 of last year. The financial requirements to meet the urgent needs in 2020 is $407 million. And also on the humanitarian front, higher than average water temperatures in the Indian Ocean have led to unreasonably heavy rainfall in East Africa. Burundi is one of the countries most affected. In the night of the 4th to 5th of December, 27 people were killed, 9 people disappeared, and 10 were injured, and over 240 households were impacted by torrential rains and landslides on at least a dozen hills in Nyebundu, located in the country's northwest province of Cibitoke. An assessment team led by the UN Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs was able to access these hard-to-reach affected areas to evaluate the damage. The UN will continue to work with government and local municipalities for the emergency response. And from South Sudan, our peacekeeping colleagues tell us that fresh outbreak of clashes between communities and others fighting over the weekend has led to civilians being killed and displaced in the center and north of the country. The head of the UN mission in South Sudan, David Shear, said he's worried that the clashes are taking place in areas that have been relatively calm for months. He added that the parties to South Sudan have respected the ceasefire signed in 2018, but that these intercommunal incidents raise tensions and increase the risk of sparking even more violence. Mr. Shear said the shortage of food and access to basic services has put huge pressure on communities, with recent flooding having destroyed crops and pastures. The UN mission is working with both local and national authorities to try to resolve the disputes and will continue to support reconciliation and peace-building efforts. Today, the UN Development Program launched its 2019 Human Development Report on Inequality. The report is entitled Beyond Income, Beyond Average, Beyond Today, and identifies new generations of inequalities that are increasingly determined to people's opportunities in the 21st century, driving the global protests sweeping the world. The report finds that just as the gap in basic standards is narrowing for millions of people, the necessities thrive has evolved, and what used to be a nice-to-haves, like access to broadband or university, have become increasingly important key to success. But without access to these, many people are finding their path to prosperity is blocked. It also talks about new inequalities rising around technology and climate change. The report is online. 2 days to focus on today. Today is International Anti-Corruption Day. In a message released, the Secretary General recalls that every year trillions of dollars, or the equivalent of more than 5% of global gross domestic product, are paid in bribes or stolen through corrupt practices that seriously undermine the rule of law and abet crimes such as the illicit trafficking of people, drugs, and arms. He urges all member states to unite against corruption, to stop the drain on resources caused by illicit financial flows. The UN Convention Against Corruption, ratified by nearly every country in the world, gives the means to strengthen our commitment to addressing the issues, he adds. And also today is the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide and the Prevention of Genocide. In a tweet, the Secretary General said that the Holocaust did not start with the gas chamber and that genocides in Rwanda and Cambodia did not start with mass killings. Those, he said, started with discrimination and hate speech. In an event that took place this morning, the UN Chef de Cabinet, Maria-Luisa Viotti, said that on behalf of the Secretary General on this day, we remember and pay tribute to the victims of horrendous crimes of genocide. We also reflect on what more we can do to uphold the responsibilities set out in the Genocide Convention. Those remarks are available to you, and I was asked about the Secretary General's own reaction to Brazil's decision last week to recognize Venezuelan asylum seekers as refugees. I can say that the Secretary General welcomes and thanks Brazil for this decision. As a former High Commissioner for Refugees, he knows full well the important impact that this will have on those Venezuelans, not least by increasing protection, access to vital services. Voilà. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. On CERF, are you going to be putting out a final tally of how much?
Yes,
this pledging?
We hope to do that. We're talking to our humanitarian colleagues.
And that will be later today?
Inshallah. Yes, Maggie.
2 questions, Steph. First, any update on UN assistance to Albania on the earthquake?
Not that I have.
Okay. And secondly, over the weekend, North Korea did some sort of, in their words, very significant test at a satellite launch site. Does the Secretary General have any reaction to that? And also to their UN ambassador's comments that denuclearization is off the table and that they don't need talks with Washington?
I mean, our reaction is really a reiteration of our stated principles, that we reiterate the Secretary General's call on the leadership of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to work for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and resume working-level talks with the United States. Diplomatic engagement is the only pathway to sustainable peace and complete and verifiable denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Halas. Okay. Hasta mañana. We need to up the energy level today. We're all a little still groggy from... Yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah, I can barely speak.